Hi, and thanks so much for being with us for the third webinar in our series on mental health education. My name is Leah Landry. I'm the Associate Director for Communications and Advancement at the Massachusetts Association for Mental Health. The Massachusetts Association for Mental Health is a statewide nonprofit committed to making sure people have the resources and opportunities necessary to protect their health and well-being. That includes mental health. Each day, MAMH brings people together to achieve that goal by sharing information, lending expertise and insight, and advocating for change. The goal of this training is to help you understand grief and loss to help you with healing. We have more trainings like this one available on our website. Visit mamh.org for these and many other mental health resources. Our series is focused on helping students and their families and caregivers better understand mental health. In our last training, we spoke broadly about trauma. Today, we're going to focus on grief and loss, but not just personal loss, like the death of a loved one, but a more universal discussion about common experiences. Common experiences can be the loss of a friendship or other losses associated with life transitions and changes. We'll also explore strategies to build protective factors and support healing, as well as helpful resources. When we think about grief and loss of a loved one may come to mind, but there are many other types of losses, including ones many of us experience, like the loss of friendships, maybe due to a move, a divorce, incarceration, or personal conflict. Many of us have also experienced job loss, either firsthand or in our families and friend groups. Losing your job can have an impact on financial security and can also disrupt a person's sense of identity or their regular routine. Other experiences may disrupt our sense of safety and security, such as homelessness, an illness, or a traumatic event. And finally, losses related to anticipated events, future plans, milestones, personal identity, and others, many of which we experienced during the coronavirus pandemic, can feel like very large losses. There are many versions of models that outline the stages of grief. But the most popular or well-known is probably Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. You'll see them listed here as denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. They're not necessarily linear, meaning they don't always happen in order, and in some cases, people won't go through all of them. That's because everyone's grief process is different. How we process grief can be impacted by social supports, individual experiences, spiritual or religious beliefs, and other cultural influences. Grief is a process very much grounded in beliefs and rituals, so it's important to be sensitive to differences in cultures and individual experience when we talk about grief. Let's take a closer look at the 5 stages. When we first face a loss, it's not uncommon to want to reject or deny the information. There's often a sense of shock or a feeling that whatever happened can't be real. This is a very emotional time in the process, and people may require different amounts of time to process the information and come to terms with what's happening. Anger is usually displayed as a coping mechanism to mask the pain and hurt being experienced. Not everyone will show anger. Sometimes this stage comes across as impatience or irritability. It's also possible to linger in this stage for some time. Bargaining comes into play when we want to regain some control after feeling vulnerable or helpless in the situation. Depression may come after you slow down long enough to let the emotions set in, or when social supports start to decrease. We may start to feel foggy, have difficulty sleeping, feel confused and overwhelmed. If you or someone you know feels stuck in this phase, it could be important to follow up for additional support. Lastly, acceptance. In this case, acceptance doesn't mean moving on. It means coming to terms with the loss and accepting the reality of the situation in a way where you can think about moving forward towards healing. Some have interpreted this as letting go, but another way to view this is as understanding the positive influence the person or situation had on our life. Another well-known theory of grief comes from David Kessler, adding a 6th stage, finding meaning. Let's talk a little more about grief, specifically how it relates to bereavement and loss. Sometimes these terms are used interchangeably. or substituted for one another. But bereavement refers to the state of loss, and grief is the reaction to that loss. Grief is the natural reaction to loss, and both a universal and a personal experience. We all experience grief and loss. It's a process that starts with acceptance, followed by meaning and the potential for growth. Since everyone experiences grief differently, it's hard to compile a list that covers everything. But some common grief reactions are listed here, and we'll talk about a few. Especially if you're younger, you may not feel like you want to leave the company of your parents, friends, or caregivers when you're grieving. In some cases, you could feel sad and isolate, and in other cases, you can act out or become angry. It's normal to feel like you've lost something bigger, like your sense of purpose. You may feel a lot of uncertainty, or even give up things you once enjoyed, like a hobby. In some cases, you may feel unmotivated to try in your classes or extracurricular activities. It's also not uncommon to experience real aches and pains when grieving. 67% of people experience pain with grief, which could manifest as headaches, stomach aches, heartburn, and more. So how can we support those grieving? And how can we model these behaviors ourselves? Here we cover how to help and what to avoid. While navigating the painful stages of grief can feel never-ending, it's important to remember that people are resilient and able to overcome adversity. Maintaining a routine can create much-needed structure and expectations. While talking about the loss may be difficult, talking helps us process the event and our emotions. Sharing memories can also help by drawing attention to the positive experiences. Encourage patience and flexibility and validate feelings. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. Finally, model self-care and self-compassion. At the same time, we want to avoid minimizing the importance of the loss or what someone's feeling. Use supportive language and prioritize listening. Grief takes time. Don't try to rush the process. Hold space for others and for yourself to share feelings. When talking with others, be mindful of privacy and limiting your conversations to only share appropriate information. While there's no set timeline, it is important to recognize some cases where symptoms of extreme or complicated grief can last 6 months to a year. This complicated, debilitating grief means a person's day-to-day life can be impacted by the loss. There are some risk factors for this type of grief, which include a traumatic death, prior experiences with trauma and loss, high levels of attachment, and sudden or unexpected loss. If you or someone you know is experiencing this type of loss, consider seeking additional support from medical or mental health providers or support groups. There are many crisis support resources in Massachusetts that are available for free 24/7 for anyone who needs help. You can call if you're feeling like you need someone to talk to, if you're having trouble coping with your feelings, or if you're feeling like you don't have any other options. You can also call on behalf of a loved one, family member, or friend. The Behavioral Health Helpline is available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, by phone call and text at 833-773-2445. You can also chat online at masshelpline.com. Also, consider these resources to learn more about grief. Thanks for taking the time to learn about grief and loss with us today. The next webinar in our series teaches you how to develop a wellness mindset. You can always learn more about mental health and your experiences on the mental health education pages at mamh.org. There are more trainings like this one available there as well. Thanks for being with us.